So my career in chemistry really got rekindled when at the age of 15 we were assigned the duty to present a chemical experiment or a scientific experiment to our class in school. And being a typical boy, I procrastinated. I never prepared for that. But eventually, I think 2 nights before this assignment was due, in somewhat of a panic, I turned to my dad and asked if he could give me some help, suggest an experiment that might be interesting for the class. And Dad was waiting for this. So he said, I have a good idea. We'll demonstrate the relative oxidation potential of metals with water. Now, I thought that sounded like a pretty dumb idea. You know, watch a nail rust. But he said, no, I have a good idea. So he brought home a box, and it had some test tubes with solvents. And the experiment went as follows. Now, those of you who recall the periodic table on the far left, so over on this side, at the top is hydrogen, atomic number 1, and below that is lithium, followed by sodium, followed by potassium. And so the experiment, to take a sliver of lithium, now lithium is a silvery metal, has a modest degree of reactivity. So I dropped the sliver of the lithium on a beaker of water, and a little fizz, a little fizz erupted because the metal is slightly unstable. So then the next on the elemental scale is sodium. Now sodium is very reactive. You drop the sliver of sodium on the water and a bright yellow flare shot around. It was quite exciting, and all the children were activated. And then the final part of the experiment was to take a sliver of potassium out of the solvent. It's in solvent to protect it from oxidating by air. And the potassium sliver exploded into a bright yellow or bright pink flare shooting around quite violently, and all the children were amazed. Now, I didn't listen to my dad very well because he explained how to end the experiment. But since I didn't listen, I just threw everything in the sink. And as you can imagine, the potassium hit the water in the sink, which exploded the solvent with a huge flare. They had to repaint the roof of the laboratory. And my sweater that my mother had knitted me for Christmas was singed in the front, and my eyebrows were burned off. But a scientist was born. I'll never forget the expression on my high school or my teacher's face. I think he nearly had a heart attack. So further in high school, again, the teachers were wonderful. As a student, I wasn't particularly devoted. If I was interested, I got very activated. If I was not interested, I did almost nothing. My major interests were in girls and athletics. And when it came time to take the chemistry class in high school, I received a D, which is the next to the lowest grade. In fact, I deserved to fail. Since Dad was a chemistry professor, how could you irritate him more than by showing no interest in his favorite subject? But then, upon finishing high school, I had an awakening. A career is a wonderful thing to have, and it was really the interest in becoming a medical missionary. In our Norwegian community, they were very religious, and I wasn't particularly religious, but I was very interested in the people that we knew who became doctors and nurses and worked in Africa and Asia in the poorest the poorest areas. Our congressman actually was a medical missionary in China. The governor's sister was a medical nurse, a missionary in Cameroon in Africa. And so that's what I decided I wanted to do. And as I looked around the universities, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore had a particular emphasis at their medical school on the diseases of the poorest people in the world. And so this is why I went there. Now, it was really a wonderful time at Johns Hopkins. Baltimore is a very poor city. You have some poor people in Italy, but we have many poor people in Baltimore. And there were a lot of hazards. Nevertheless, I think within the university there was a really dedicated community of scholars. And I'm so grateful to have had the chance to work in a laboratory there, and I chose to work on a problem affecting the third world. This was in the early 1970s, and cholera was sweeping the world. Cholera is a horrible diarrheal disease. It's often fatal. Now, it was not exactly a socially intriguing topic to study. I remember going to mixers with at a local girls' college, meeting young ladies. And of course, they thought being a medical doctor was a great career. And I remember once being particularly attracted to one young lady, and she asked me what kind of doctor I would like to be. And I told her I was studying diarrhea, and that was the end of the conversation. She left. But I met my wife Mary, who grew up on a farm, and she worked in a laboratory, and she was not alienated by this fascination with the diseases of the most impoverished Americans. Now, I'd like to just emphasize the importance of scientific training in laboratories, because reading books is sometimes pretty dull. But the laboratory I worked in at Johns Hopkins on the cholera project had fascinating individuals, and more excitement, I think, generated by the scientists themselves than our research studies. And just to like to remember a couple of these people to you. They came from all over the world. They had different backgrounds. My friend Van Bennett was a big wave surfer from Hawaii. And Morley Hollenberg was a Rhodes Scholar from Canada. Ignacio Sandoval, a jet black, bearded, intense Spaniard who spent time in prison in Spain because of Franco's regime. And Ignacio was a good friend, but he was very intense and very antagonistic towards patrician lifestyles. And Ignacio worked alongside an Italian who came to the laboratory, who was a fantastic individual. He's quite a celebrity in Naples. His name is Gianfredo Pucca. And my wife will tell you that Gianfredo is the handsomest man on the world. The handsomest man. As a student, he was picked out of a crowd by an Italian director to play the role of gigolos in movies. And he was a downhill ski racing champion. His girlfriend was the heiress to the Vespa fortune. But Gianfredo's father was an academic neuroscientist. And he always said, Gianfredo, you will become a doctor, you will become a scientist. But what would a handsome, athletic film star want to study in a laboratory? Well, remember, he's Italian. What is the most important question for any Italian male? The molecular basis of femininity, of course. And Gianfredo solved the problem by the first isolation of the estrogen receptor by affinity chromatography. Of course, when Gianfredo was in the laboratory working, he was very intense. You couldn't disturb him unless you were a woman. And I'll never forget, there was at this time, smoking was still allowed in the university. And there was a constant stream of secretaries sashaying down the hallway with unlit cigarettes. Jean Freda would be there to light their cigarettes. He was irresistible. Also in the laboratory, one summer, we were joined by a young scientist from Beirut, Lebanon. He was brilliant. His name was Naji Sahioun. He was a Palestinian. He grew up in a refugee camp in southern Lebanon. And like many growing up in such circumstances, he bore intense hatred towards Israel. He'd never been to Israel. And when he came to the United States, he assumed all Jews were Zionists. It was a prejudice he carried. But science is very special. It brings people together. And Naji worked together with Marvin Siegel. Marvin was a jovial, big, fat fellow, grandson of a rabbi from Brooklyn, New York. And they became the best of friends. So I think, again, science is very special. It brings people together. Now, my own laboratory career was interrupted because I did clinical training. And Mary and I were married. We had 2 children, 2 beautiful little girls. And I decided to return to do additional scientific training because the preparative career of a science is long. And we've moved back to Baltimore. We'd done some training at other universities, and I was working in the lab. I was very happy, and a very, very tragic event occurred. So Mary was pregnant with our 3rd child, and just at the end of her pregnancy, she had a premature separation of the placenta. The placenta came away from the uterine wall, and it wasn't diagnosed right away. And so our 3rd child was born with huge distress. It was very traumatic, barely survived. And those of you with clinical training have already know the answer is the child is born profoundly affected, severe cerebral palsy, presumably severe mental retardation. And this was a wake-up call because I was a postdoctoral fellow without a permanent job. And in the United States, people in such situations don't have complete medical insurance. So we were destitute and also really emotionally completely unnerved. But Mary was very strong, and she resolved to make the best life she could for our family. And I decided to redirect my career looking for problems of the newborn. Now, the problem of our daughter, of course, eventually killed her. She didn't live so long. She died as an infant. But she had the consequences of brain swelling due to brain injury. And this is a problem of water. But I had no advanced training in neuroscience and was working actually on a hematology problem. But science is interesting because you never know what to expect when you do an experiment. And we were working on another problem, but we inadvertently discovered a new protein that turned out to be the first molecular water channel, the first aquaporin. So Dr. Boncinelli described the aquaporins. These are the plumbing system of cells. It allows water to enter cells and leave cells. Now, our bodies are 2/3 water. All of our tissues are mostly water. We share this with all other life forms, other mammals, invertebrates, microorganisms, plants, even archaea, the 3rd kingdom of life. So the aquaporins explain